I recently finished The King and Conqueror, a new historical medieval show, and Reddit claims that this is one of the worst medieval shows ever made. They say it's insulting, wildly inaccurate, historically embarrassing, but I actually like the show quite a bit. And I just finished reading Marc Morris's The Norman Conquest, which is a pretty extensive history book covering these topics. So today I'm going to pull some of the top comments from r/medieval history on a thread about this show and see if the comments are fair criticism or if I have something to say against them. Let's go fight some Redditors.
Oh, okay.
So The King and Conqueror is a historical show covering the time period during 1066, a little before and a little after, where William, the Duke of Normandy, which is kind of in the north of France, became William the Conqueror, and he pushed his claim to the English throne and take an army and conquer the whole of England. After which the Normans, which came over with William, kind of represented this whole cultural shift that affected the rest of the political and cultural history of England. The story is super interesting because it kind of reads like a Game of Thrones style drama. There's like a bunch of different factions, different betrayals, people go semi-crazy. Everyone's really weirdly interlinked. Like William and his like arch rival Harold like knew each other, and Harold had sworn to uphold William's claim to the crown. So it's this really interesting, really brutal, intertwined drama with some really strong female characters as well. So let's dive right into it. The first comment, oh, by the way, spoilers for sure, for both the history and the show. Although it did happen more than 1,000 years ago, so get up to date on that stuff. Well, actually less than 1,000 years ago, but almost 1,000 years ago. The title of the post is King and Conqueror is diabolically inaccurate. It's like they didn't even try. And the first point the poster makes, it says, first of all, Harold is clean shaven and William has facial hair, which is the other way around historically, with the Normans famously preferring a clean shaven look. So, this one is valid, super valid, especially because we have such a clear depiction of these two characters on the Bayeux Tapestry, which is like one of the most important medieval artifacts ever. And as a mustache carrier myself, this is near and dear to my heart. This can basically be called like mustache gate. It is ridiculous that they gave the wrong character a prominent mustache. Genuinely, it makes me a little angry. So this first comment is really valid. Let's move on. Okay, another point. Here's another comment. Harald Hardrada and the Norwegians were depicted like something straight out of hell. All black clothing, shadows, fire everywhere, heads on spikes. This is true. This is another big gripe I think I had with the show. The Norwegians, which is kind of the end of the Viking Age at this point, they are depicted as these like insane, dirty, dark, mystical, brutal, barbarian creatures. But this like this could not be further from the truth. First of all, Vikings were like renowned for their hygiene and their like hair routines. There's like numerous combs and artifacts that you can look up where Vikings used all the time to brush their hair. A lot of sources say Vikings had like long, shiny hair and they really cared about their appearance. So this is just, this did kind of baffle me a little bit, especially Harald Hardrada here, who was the leader of the Vikings. He was like this larger than life like character straight out of like a Marvel movie. Like he had been everywhere. He had been to Constantinople. He's like a flamboyant, crazy guy. So I guess in that sense he's crazy, but yeah, to depict him as this like wretched, dark, dirty, barbarian character, yeah, okay. 2 points against the show. Not off to a great start. Oh yeah, and the reply describes it perfectly. They said they're making him out to be like some kind of evil wizard, dark lord from a cheap fantasy movie. Yeah, I kind of agree with that one. Okay, next comment says, there was a moment when someone said Harold Godwinson, son of Godwin, as if they didn't know Godwinson was not his surname, but his patronymic. Okay, this is a massive nitpick and I disagree with this comment. If you're an average viewer, you're not gonna realize that, well, okay, now that I say it out loud, it sounds kind of stupid, but Godwinson literally means son of Godwin, right? So for your average viewer, he's known as Harold Godwinson. In like history, if you're gonna look him up, it's gonna be Harold Godwinson. I don't have that big of a problem with this. It's like, this is such a big nitpick. Who cares? Next. Oh, here's another one. This is actually one of my biggest nitpicks with the show. It says, I also suspect the dirty and leathery, earthy look everyone is wearing isn't just uninspired production design, it's also easier to conceal bad quality garments and materials as if there's grunge on them. Okay, so I don't really care about, okay, concealing bad quality materials or something, but the medieval period was very colorful. And this show was like Game of Thrones-y dark. William the Conqueror wore almost exclusively pure black clothing for the entire show. That kind of irked me because like, I get it. I think sometimes super colorful medieval stuff maybe looks a little bit like too silly or too whimsical. They want to preserve the brutal and dark tone of the show, but man, colorful medieval stuff looks so cool. Take any examples of like, if you look at like old medieval movies from the 60s and 70s, yeah, they look a little silly, but they have this like ethereal vibe to them because they're using these super colorful costuming and outfits. And even games like Kingdom Come Deliverance like do that really well, where you've got a medieval setting, but clearly even the peasants are like, oh, I want to look good. I don't want to look like I'm just wearing a brown sack all day. Like people are wearing colorful clothing, and knights especially. Like if you're going into battle, one of the main reasons we have all this heraldry and like flags and tabards and stuff is like, you want to know who's on your side, right? Like you got to be clearly visible in the colors and the heraldry that you're decked out in. So yeah, that one's not a big, like, I think this show's still enjoyable regardless of the color, but that did kind of hurt my heart a little of like the sepia filter with the black clothing. It's pretty anachronistic, ahistorical. I get that it contributes to the tone of the show, but I think you could have done it great. The King is another great example, well, good example of adding some color. I still think the King's movie was a little too dark, but still did better than King and Conqueror, unfortunately. Okay, next comment. Not to mention William having anachronistic Norman heraldry of the two leopards on his shield, and in any case, even if his shield did have a lion, it would be more Romanesque style. Dude. Okay, and a lot of the comments fall under this vein. This is stupid. To nitpick the show to this level, I think is ridiculous. If you want a show that preserves all of that detail, just watch a documentary, bro. Just read a book. Read The Norman Conquest by Marc Morris. Pretty good book. I'll put a review of it on here in the channel sometime. But like the main story beats are preserved, well, more or less. But you're caring about the fact that the leopard on his shield is not a Romanesque style lion? Come on, man. Okay, next comment. Edward the Confessor murders his mother with the crown. Yeah. This one's undefendable. This is like just so far from the actual history. It did add to the show. I think it made his character look a little more like insane, but I think it could have done that in so many more ways that preserves, I think her name was Edith. I gotta double check that. Her character. She was such a powerful character. After all this goes down and William is king, she like tries to foment several rebellions, like just such a really cool, devious, powerful female character. And having Edward the Confessor, the king, like brutally murder his mother by bashing her with his crown, it was like, again, a big Marc against the show. That was a little unexplainable. However, I will pivot from this into saying, I saw a lot of comments about like, oh, there were several aspects of the female characters' stories that weren't exactly like holistically accurate to the way how their story played out in real life. And I actually didn't have as big of a problem with this because I felt that the vibe of the female characters in this show was very well portrayed and very indicative of the actual historical women's roles. There were some really awesome women, like especially Edith Swanneck, who's Harold Godwinson's first wife. Like, oh man, the depth of their story is genuinely so incredible, especially at a time where I think a lot of people's common preconception of the medieval era is that women were very oppressed, which is definitely true, but noble women specifically had a lot of influence and a lot of power. And it's kind of refreshing to see the stories of these real medieval women and how they played, you know, grand strategy political games just as well as their sons or their husbands. So I felt that the vibe that the show portrayed, even though the stories were not really 100% accurate, I felt like they did justice to the characters in that sense. Matilda, William the Conqueror's wife, was not a torturer. I don't know why they added that in the show and made her like this like sadistic torturer that could extract information. I think she probably was a great, you know, spy maybe, or she was great at like sussing out court gossip or whatever, but like to make her like a literal torturer, okay, that was a little bit of a stretch for sure. Okay, here's a comment that I definitely disagree with. Edward the Confessor is a saint in Christianity, so obviously they couldn't possibly suggest he was anything less than a monster. And the response to this is great. Yes, but reading the history, he wasn't really that Christ-like of a guy IRL. He was largely an ineffectual ruler whose faults can be blamed for many of the things that befell England after his death. He got posthumously mythologized as this super pious, wonderful guy, largely due to this record that was called The Life of Edward that was commissioned by his wife. Anyway, all that to say, in fact, Edward the Confessor, who is a saint, wasn't that cool of a guy. His legacy is like mostly written after with like a rose-tinted glasses and heavy propaganda in the record. So yeah, I disagree with this comment. I don't think Edward the Confessor was that. He was definitely Christian, but to say he was like a great Christian and they're like trying to slander him, I don't think that's true. He kind of sucked. This last question is a good one to talk about my thoughts. The entertainment industry has utter disdain for medieval times. They treat it like free IP fantasy. And I guess I can understand where all these comments are coming from. In conclusion, if I look back, the show did get a lot of things wrong. And there were a lot of ways in which the show was not an accurate depiction of medieval times at all. However, at the same time, I really enjoyed the show. The characters were great. The acting was mostly really great. It kept me hooked, and my wife loved it. So I was really into this history book, and I was able to bring my wife into like nerding out with me because she was able to watch the show and like know these same characters and stuff. I think that's kind of what sold it for me. It did its job. Like, I'm not watching this show to have it be a documentary to tell me exactly how the lion on William the Conqueror's shield was painted. I'm not even gonna come out of this show and say, oh, well, Edward the Confessor killed his mom, and I know that for a fact. I'm watching the show not only because it's entertaining, but because it gives me the vibe, to be honest. It's all about the vibe. And while there are some things that could change in the vibe, I think watching the show and pairing it with the book that I was reading was a fun experience. It was fun to compare and contrast, and I like the show. Sue me. Anyway, guys, I will get a review up of that book on the channel sometime soon. But I do have a tier list of all the books I read last year, and that was one of them. So go ahead and check that one out. I'm ranking, I think I read 21 books last year. A huge variety. I think it was like 5 history books, 5 fantasy books, 5 thrillers, 5 random, couple sci-fi in there. So yeah, check it out, guys. And check out King and Conqueror. It's a pretty good show, despite its historical inaccuracies.